Hey guys, thanks for joining Diesel Performance Podcast. I'm Chris Ehmke.
And I'm Alex Hogue over here at Calibrated Power.
And today we decided to get behind the wheel of our 2022 Ram 2500. It has the Cummins inline 6 with the 68 RFE transmission. Alex, we've had a lot of seat time in this truck over the last few weeks. And one of the things that's really unique with the 22s is the question of, is it tunable, is it not tunable? And one of the things I'm really proud to announce now is we are officially live with support on the 2022 Ram standard output and high output trucks. It's a little bit of an unorthodox platform. It's a little bit of an unorthodox type of install from what the Cummins guys have been used to in the past. But nonetheless, we're here and it's tuned. So like I mentioned, we've had a couple of weeks of some travel and stuff like that. We were recently at UCC.
Yep,
right?
It was a great time all the way around.
Yeah, so we've had some time to, I've put about 3,800 miles on the truck over the last month. So yeah, we figured, let's do a ride along in this thing and kind of talk about some of the benefits and some of the things that, we see can be improved in these platforms and kind of what to expect in the package.
Yeah, and in regards to that package, one of the things that makes this a little bit more unorthodox from some of our other tuning platforms that you might be familiar with, biggest thing is you're going to do what's called an ECM swap on one of these. We will be providing you with that set ECM. Essentially what that process is going to look like is once you get the product from us, depending on if you've got engine or trans tuning coming with it as well, you'll actually call in to our customer support line. They'll actually be able to schedule a time with you and walk you through the steps of what this process is going to look like.
Yeah. So on the earlier model Rams, pretty much your 03 all the way through your 2021, there's been a flash tool sent to you. You're able to just upload the tuning into the vehicle and the rest is history. In the 2022s at this point in time, there is a lock patch in the factory controller, which is going to require you to replace the ECM. So you'll be able to call in with a scheduled appointment and one of our techs will be able to walk you through the installation from start to finish. One of the cool features with this platform is we are going to be doing this through a software and hardware called HP Tuner, and they offer or give us the ability to enable switch on the fly to be done through the factory steering wheel control. So this offers for a little bit more of a refined, sleek operation of how the switch on the fly operation will take place, and there's no added need for a secondary switch or holes to be drilled in the dash or anything of the sort. So now, one of the things that separates us over at Calibrated Power from a lot of the other tuning companies out there is, we focus heavily on the emissions on side of things. Now, Alex, this was your first UCC, Ultimate Call Out Challenge 2023 down in Brownsburg, Indiana. And we've had a lot of guys coming up to the booth, about the podcast, about Calibrated Power, and the 22 Ram was a really hot topic. So what was some of the feedback that you were getting while we were at that show?
I think the biggest thing, with us being an emissions on company was the amount of people who came to you and asked, do you have delete tuning for these 22s? And it was really cool to see you kind of change their opinion about the delete tuning culture with some of the opportunities, that we've been able to do here with emissions on tuning.
No, I think there's a stigma, and I mean it's crazy to think. I've been in this industry professionally for about 10 years now, and to see that stigma still be very real and very true to a lot of guys' hearts, that if you want to make power with one of these trucks, you have to remove the emissions, or the emissions is going to be a bottleneck and cap you in improving on the truck's overall operation. I always question guys like, what are you looking for in a tune? What are you looking to gain? Are you looking to gain better throttle response? Because I can do that. Are you looking to improve the torque curve of the motor and give the truck a wider operating range to make it more efficient? We can do that. I get a lot of complaints with the 68 RFE transmissions. They're very clunky. They don't shift very nicely. We can take care of all of that as well, right? So, for example, this truck, it's a 2022, it's a 2500, so that's going to be equipped with the 68 RFE, and it has our refined trans tuning into the truck. I'll tell you what, being a Cummins guy through and through, I would never buy one of these trucks and leave it stock for the simple fact that I don't like the way the 68 shift. We have luxury of being at the shop with a lot of the Fords and the GM platforms. Ultimately, those trucks shift nicer. They drive nicer from the factory. The 68s, I would put right in line with one of those trucks, but they need a little bit of help. that aspect. So, you're going to get line pressure control, you're going to get shift strategy improvement, you're going to get converter strategy improvement, and we're going to offer you a couple of different style trans tunes that can work specifically to you and your application based on tire size, gear ratio, turbocharger, that kind of thing. But back to what you were asking, or what you were mentioning when we were at UCC, a lot of guys think that the emissions are really going to hinder the type of power that the truck can potentially create. And, I always joke around with guys and say, hey, you want to go emissions on or you want to go emissions off, you're still limited by the same limiting factors. If it's a 68 truck, it's the factory trans. We're going to have to do a valve body upgrade or a torque converter upgrade in order to bump that power up. That limitation lies whether the truck is emissions on or the truck is emissions off. Another limitation that we see with these trucks is, let's say you do the transmission upgrade, or maybe you have an HO truck with the ACE and trans, well, your next limitation is going to be the turbocharger. So the emissions are nowhere in the limiting area of the power capabilities that these things can create. One of the big things too that we see is guys don't want to see their trucks regen all the time. Well, in a good calibration, we can actually help improve some of that air fuel control, and we can get the truck to actually operate on a cleaner scale than what the factory even allotted. That's going to offer the truck to be more efficient. That's going to allow the truck to operate in a more reliable manner. So those are some of those things that, at the end of the day, guys want better drivability, they want better throttle response, they want to get a little bit more reliability out of the truck, and they want to pick up some power in the process.
And it's funny you say that as well, because I think we had a few people still with that stigma like you were talking about, and one of the things I kept hearing over and over again, well, if you have emissions compliant truck and you tune it, doesn't that hurt the emissions equipment?
Yeah. And I mean, to answer that question on a wide scale, I can't sit there and tell you that all emissions tuning is equal, just like all tuning in general isn't equal, just like all aftermarket parts that are on the market are not all considered equal. But when you put a good tune in the truck and the truck is mechanically sound and you don't have any mechanical hiccups, the truck isn't going to be hurt or more taxing due to having the emissions on the truck. Now, if I'm going to be beating the crud out of the truck day in and day out, I'm just as susceptible to hurting it in factory form as I would with a tune. So it really just comes down to vehicle maintenance and driving it with an appropriate foot.
Yep, and that makes complete sense, and I really hope that starts to clear up some of the stigmas behind this tuning.
Well, and I think, I've over the years, I've seen guys that, hey, I want to try to do it emissions on, I want to try something different, and the outcome has always been very positive. We're not in the era of 07, 08, 09 trucks with the early emissions. Like, we're in the era of a 2022, 2023 year model truck. I'm not saying that there aren't emissions issues that still potentially come into play, but I would say that the same type of issues that a lot of guys are afraid of dealing with from years past are no longer present. Those situations are behind us.
Yeah, and on top of that, with the technology and how far it's come, in the last 10 to 12 years, if you will.
You have a lot of mapping, right? There's a lot of control in the factory controller to kind of help improve some of that stuff. One thing I always note is my old 2015 Ram, that truck, had twin turbos for a very long time. It had upgraded fuel components from Exergy Performance, and that was a truck that made really good power and was very unorthodox for its time. Back in 2019, we actually pulled the factory EGR off of the truck to service it, and we put a couple GoPros on that EGR system, and that truck had never lived an easy life. And I thought that was a really good position for us to say, hey, here's what a higher horsepower emissions on truck looks like. If there is an EGR that should be bad, or if there was a carbon buildup that should have taken place, that would have been the truck to do it. And it was one of those where I still use that video and those pictures to this day as reference to guys to kind of illustrate and show that we're not just smoking mirrors, right? There is some validity to this. Now, when it comes to the 22 specifically, the tuning strategy is going to be very similar to what we have done in the 19s and the 20s and the 21s. The biggest issue or the biggest hiccup is simply going to be the fact that the ECM needs to be swapped out, which adds that extra level of complexity into the install.
Yeah, and in regards to that ECM swap, I think what we do over here at Calibrated Power is kind of different than a lot of the other tuning companies, where we actually have a technical support line you can call Monday through Friday, 9 to 5.
Yeah, no, that's a big thing. I got off the phone earlier with a gentleman who, bought tuning from a third party, and he was having issues, and he had mentioned that everything's in a ticket system, everything's via email, nothing's on the phone, and he's frustrated. His truck's down. We identify internally that, these trucks are very expensive. You know, you don't want your truck down. You want to offer or have a service that is kind of a cut and dry, very clean cut operation where, you know, you can spend the money, your truck's not going to be down. You know that you're in good hands. Not only are you buying good quality tunes, but you have a support system to support the product, as it might not be something that you deal with on a daily basis, like something like we do. You know, we deal with it on a daily basis. So what I'd like to do is I want to pull over up here ahead, and I want to get you behind the wheel of this thing. I want you to drive it, and I want to get some first impressions. Like I said, I've had a ton of seat time in this thing. I'm a big fan of the way it shifts. I'm a big fan of the throttle input. I'm a big fan of how the truck holds and maintains a gear, you know, when it's moving forward. But I want to get you behind the wheel and take it for a little drive and kind of see from an outsider looking in how this thing reacts for you.
Awesome, and I'm really excited to do that here with you today.
All right, so a little fire drill action, you know, with that stop sign behind us. And Alex, what do you think? You know, initial impression.
Overall, I really like it. These are very comfortable trucks to drive. You definitely get a good bird's eye view of everything going around, and with our tuning, I mean, it really kind of wakes up the engine in these trucks.
I mean, the initial throttle response, one of the things I get a ton of complaints with in the 4th gen Dodge and of course the 5th gen is the delay, or, you know, the throttle is very lethargic, right? There's just, it's not very linear. You have to get really heavy into the throttle for the truck to register and actually pick up and go. Coming up to the stop sign here, we'll take a right. So, you know, one of the things that we always try to look at is how do we make that throttle, I don't want to say sensitive, because I don't want to make the throttle so sensitive that you touch it and it's snappy, but more so, you know, make it more refined. You know, let 5% be 5%, 10% be 10%. And that's one of the things over at the shop we've always referred to as drivability, right? We want the truck to drive of a factory stature, but more refined, making it more responsive or more predictable as to what it's going to do, right? Cut out some of those dead spots, cut out some of those laggy responses that the trucks from the factory tend to have. More so in the 68 or in the Ram platform, more than what I would say you'd see in the GM and the Fords.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree with that. And something I've been meaning to ask you on this trip, you know, you've been a big Cummins guy ever since you've been in the industry, and, you know, with all the models that you've owned, how do you compare the 22s versus some of the other trucks that you've had in the past?
Well, I mean, you know, the 22, in my opinion, is the same as the 19s, 20s, and the 21s, right? It's all under that 5th gen umbrella, okay? So, yeah, you have the ECM swap, which puts this thing on its own separate island in a sense. You know, but I mean, this is the newest of the newest, right? Like, this is the most refined platform that Ram has ever come to the public with. And that was the same way with my first impressions driving the 15 when I had bought that. That was the most refined Ram platform, you know, at its time. And for my case, like, that truck's always going to hold a special spot in my heart as being, you know, one of the true stepping stones coming from an 0759 into that 1567. But I would say, you know, all in all, Ram really knocked this truck out of the park, besides the interior, which we're not here to go over, you know, certain things like that, but just the refinedness of the truck itself. They go to a 3.73 gear ratio in the 2500s, where in the 15 models or your 13 to 18 models specifically, they had a 342 gear with the 68 RFE. So the 3.73s in the 68s definitely give the truck a little bit more of a peppiness to it. These things just, they're quiet, they tow like a dream. They're really a refined, really nice overall machine that, you know, I've had a lot of great times in this truck, putting some miles on this. It made me want to buy a newer one, right? So I ended up recently purchasing a 20 myself. And it's one of those things where as these newer platforms become available, you know, you get to that next level of refinement and different things that the OEMs are trying to come to the market with.
Yeah, and in addition to, you know, kind of talking about all of the generations of these newer trucks, with our tuning, what are the horsepower numbers that you're going to see with something like this? So
it's pretty standard, whether it is the 68 or if it's the ASIN. The power levels that we offer, it's a 20 horse heavy tow, a 40 horse light tow, an 80 horse street tune, and then it's a 100 horsepower sport tune. And these power levels are all at the rear tire, okay, over stock. Where things get a little dicey is the 2500 trucks baseline around 340 horsepower, and the ASIN trucks baseline at roughly 400 wheel horsepower. So the power levels over stock are the same as far as horsepower increase, but the peak powers are different because the 3500 HO versus the 2500 or the standard output 3500 baseline at different power levels. So in a 68 RFE truck, the baseline is 340. We're able to go upwards of about 440, 450 to the tire. And if it was an HO truck, the baseline at 400 horsepower, we're actually able to create about 500 to the tire. Now, if that 68 RFE truck has upgraded trans components, specifically the valve body, we could turn that truck's power output to that 500 horsepower range as well. So for us, it's all about the reliability game. We want to keep trucks on the street. I don't want to provide a tune that's going to be too hot, that's going to potentially hurt the stock trans or put that truck out of commission. So, you know, any of the times anyone calls over at the shop, we ask those questions. That way we can set you up with the appropriate product for the application and not overpower the truck.
And Chris, you know, for viewers at home who are looking at getting into a valve body modification on their 22, do you have any brands or companies you would recommend looking at before purchasing?
I mean, RevMax, that's a company that we've worked with very closely over the years. You know, that's a company that I could tell you they offer a great product. They have their Zero Flex billet valve body for the 68s of all years. So regardless of it being a 22 or a 5th gen Dodge, they have them for the 4 gens, they have them for the 3rd gens. Been working with them a lot, done a bunch of those over the years. There are some other guys out there. I know, you know, 68s are becoming more and more of a transmission topic for a lot of aftermarket trans builders, but for our first-hand experience, you know, it's kind of been that RevMax piece to get us up and going. So, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, if you guys have any questions or have any interest on that, you can always reach out over at the shop, Calibrated Power. We'd be glad to help. I think for us, Alex, we're going to take this thing on the open road, get a couple more miles under our belt, and we'll wrap this thing up. So for listeners, I'm Chris Ehmke.
And I'm Alex Hogue.